My name is Jose, and I would like to share a terrible memory I have about chocolate. About 4 years ago, when I was 18, I went to a chocolate shop and met a guy named Evan. I still vividly remember his bright smile. His teeth were brown because they were all smeared with chocolate. When he offered his hands for a handshake, his hands were stained with chocolate too. But he was very friendly, and we soon became friends. He was a chocolate maniac. He even always had chocolate inside his pocket, so his pocket was bulged. However, I did not realize how dangerous he was. As we got to know each other better, he often gave me chocolate. I just accepted it at first, but I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. But what was even more strange was that he watched me eating the chocolate, and every time I swallowed it, he let out an exclamation and hugged himself. One time, when I deliberately didn't swallow the chocolate out of curiosity, he stared at me for a long time and tried to open my mouth, yelling at me and wanting to know why I wasn't swallowing it. He only calmed down after I swallowed it. As time went by, he became more and more strange. One day, he brought me a box of chocolates and told me to eat them all. I said I didn't want to, but he shouted at me as if entreating, "Please, I want to be happy." He suddenly became short of breath and started unwrapping chocolates and stuffing them into my mouth. I took a few, then he shouted in relief like I had just rescued him from drowning. Thank you so much, really?" Then he started to cry. I was perplexed. After that, he started treating me like a VIP. He said he would do anything I asked him to. When I asked him why he was so nice to me, he said, "Because I'll always need you." I couldn't understand what he meant. After that, his chocolate attacks continued. Even when we ate together, he kept putting chocolate in my food. And while we were talking to each other, he kept tossing chocolate into my mouth. I started to get more and more irritated, and I even started to gain weight and become unhealthy. I told him to stop giving me chocolate. Then he suddenly grinned and said quietly, "You need chocolate in your body 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Without that, you're just a piece of meat." I thought maybe he had some strange mental illness and told him not to contact me anymore. Then, a few days later, he sent 30 boxes of chocolate to my house and told me he would no longer contact me if I sent him a video of myself eating them all. I blocked his number. I haven't seen him for a long time. I felt relieved, but the story did not end there. After a while, I heard that he had been arrested for murder. He met a girl through a dating app, brought her to his house, tied her to his bed, and poured hot, boiling chocolate all over her body. Her mouth had been wedged open, and the autopsy showed that there were 5 pounds of chocolate in her stomach. And there was a video of her with Evan on her phone in which he was lying in a bathtub full of chocolate saying to her, "If you can survive under this for 1 minute, I'll give you $100. After the police investigated his house, they discovered something even more shocking. There was a huge block of chocolate in the basement, over 7 feet long, and inside it was the dead body of a man. Everyone was shocked. I reopened the last text Evan had sent me. It read as below, "I'm going to fill your body with chocolate. Your stomach and bladder will be filled with chocolate. Chocolate will flow in your veins, and if someone stabs you, chocolate will come out. You will become chocolate. You will become chocolate." At the time, I thought he was just joking, but now I realize he had meant everything he said. I started vomiting, and from then on I started to suffer from a phobia of chocolate. He went to prison, and I eventually met his mother. She told me something shocking. She said that he had harassed her for a long time too, and now just the sight of chocolates made her breathe heavily. Evan had loved chocolate since he was young, and his obsession only grew stronger as he got older. When he was about 16, he was taken to the hospital because he ate too much chocolate, and the doctor told him not to eat it at all anymore. So he said to the doctor, "Then can I feed it to my mom instead?" From then on, she realized that something was strange about him. He had started to force her to eat a box of chocolate every day, and she ended up secretly throwing them all away and lying to him that she had eaten them all. Then one day, he came up to her with a knife and said, "I have to check to see if there's chocolate in your belly." She ran away, leaving him alone and never came back. She cried, saying that she had expected an accident like this to happen someday. When I thought of him, I felt terrible about it. But for my own safety, I decided not to see him again. Time has passed, and he is still in prison. Sometimes I wonder how he's doing there.
When I was 10, I was playing outside in the park with my little white bunny. I was letting her eat the grass, but suddenly she stood up. I usually don't see her do this because I never let her get near anything dangerous. But she sensed something dangerous. I didn't know where that danger was, and I thought it was nothing. So I just continued to watch my bunny. However, she zoomed to the corner of the park fence. I was super confused. Plus, it was almost sunset, and I had to go home. So I picked her up gently, with my other hand supporting her bum. I was getting a chill, so I walked fast, in case the danger she sensed was following. I looked back, and I saw a sketchy man with sunglasses. And I saw he had a bulldog with him. It was drooling, and it looked like it wanted to eat me and my bunny. So I booked it out of there. I ran as fast as I could, hoping he didn't let the dog free. I hugged my bunny near my chest so she wouldn't wobble around while I ran. And when I looked back again, his hand was on the dog's collar. He was about to remove the leash. I was tearing up. But then I saw my neighbor. He's a 6'1", 20-year-old man. So I ran to him and hid behind him. He was confused about why I hid behind him, and I explained, "That man is about to let his bulldog free, and it might eat me and my bunny." And with that, he looked surprised and angered, probably because why would anyone do that? Don't they know if they let a big scary dog free, the dog will get shot? Even though the park was near my house, it was 2 minutes away, and I couldn't run any faster because I was only 4'6". He told me to get back safely with my bunny, so I did. As I was walking home, shaking, I heard my neighbor yell, "If you let your bulldog free, I will call the barangay." But it seemed like the man didn't care. After a few minutes, I got home. I put down my bunny, and she hopped away slowly. I started crying, and I called for my mom, but she wasn't home, so I sat down on my bed, crying. Did I just get an emotional shock from a man and a bulldog? I don't know. But to this day, I avoid bringing any pets to the park that would be considered a type of prey. I'm 14 now. Although my bunny passed away due to sickness, I ask those who bring such small animals to the park to please try to avoid any big predators and strange-looking men. When I was 16 years old, I had this experience with my then-girlfriend, Samantha. Samantha lived in a neighboring county and didn't drive, so we rarely saw each other during the school week for any extended period of time, especially alone. We agreed to skip school on Monday to spend time together. Being that it was a Monday, I knew my father and stepmother would be at work, so we'd have the house to ourselves to play video games and just curl up on the couch to watch TV together with no distractions. The house I lived in was located in a suburban-style neighborhood, surrounded by rural countryside and woods. It was a 2-story home with 3 beds upstairs and 1 downstairs, and the entire kitchen area was covered in wood flooring. More on that later. The house also had a security system with sensors on all entry doors and a motion sensor pointed down toward the end of the main hallway beyond the foyer that led out into the kitchen. Samantha and I were upstairs looking through my brother's extensive baseball card collection and playing silly games like Never Have I Ever, when we both heard someone walking around downstairs. Samantha heard it first, then I paused and I heard it too. We both froze. Samantha asked, "Could one of your parents be home?" We sat in complete silence in my room, listening through the open bedroom door. We could hear footsteps in the kitchen, back and forth along the hardwood floor, and the sound of a paper bag ruffling, like the ones used at some grocery stores. The footsteps would progress slowly for several seconds, then stop. A paper bag would ruffle, then proceed for several more seconds, and the pantry door could be heard opening with its all-too-familiar squeak that was unmistakable to me, having lived there. Samantha whispered, "Are they putting groceries away?" I said, "It's got to be my stepmom. She's the only one who does the grocery shopping." My stepmom was far less forgiving than my dad, and being that I was skipping school with a girl in my room alone, I knew I'd be in deep shit if we got caught. Immediately, I told Samantha we needed to crawl out of my bedroom window onto the roof and hide until she left. We sat on the roof facing the street, waiting for nearly 45 minutes, just watching the driveway for my stepmom to leave, but she never did, and Samantha was getting impatient as it was unbearably hot on the black shingled roof. Finally, I told her to stay put on the roof and keep a lookout a bit longer while I went back inside to confront my stepmom. I told Samantha I'll just tell her I was sick this morning and decided to stay home from school. I had no idea how I would get Samantha out of there, but keep in mind, I wasn't prepared for this, to say the least. As I walked into the kitchen, I called out to my stepmom, but no one replied. My parents' room was also downstairs, so I walked through the room, but no one was there. I proceeded to check every room in the house, but to my surprise, the house was completely empty. I even checked the garage, but it was empty. All of the entry doors were closed and locked, and that's when the realization hit me. All of the entry doors beep when they open, including the door leading out to the garage. And neither Samantha nor I heard any doors open, including the garage door, which could be easily heard from my bedroom, as it was directly below. Lastly, I opened the pantry, hoping to cast doubt on this revelation, but I couldn't find a single new item that wasn't in there the night before. A cold chill ran down my spine. I ran upstairs and brought Samantha down from the roof, asking her if she saw anyone come or go. She saw no one. I never believed in ghosts before this day, and honestly, I wish I had a rational explanation for the whole experience. If my girlfriend hadn't been there to witness it with me, then I would probably chalk it all up to my mind playing tricks on me. I never actually saw a ghost, so I can't say for sure what it was, but I can tell you what we heard was real and convincing to the point that my girlfriend and I never doubted for a second at that moment that it was anything other than a person in my house putting groceries away. There was a certain alley that I passed by every day. It was so dark and narrow that very few people walked there, and it was owned by rats and cockroaches. But it was a shortcut, so I always took it. One day I was passing by and I saw a man crouching in the corner, eating something. I felt something strange, so I glanced at him as I quickly went by. He was holding a red bag. He put ketchup in it, and then stuck his head in it and ate it. Then he sobbed and muttered, "It's so delicious." I thought I was strange, so I hurried out of the alley. But then I heard a loud scream from the street ahead. When I went towards the sound to investigate, I saw a person lying down and several people around him screaming. I was so confused. However, when I saw the person lying down, a scream escaped me without even realizing it. He was dead, holding his head with both eyes open, and there were large knife marks on the back of his head, and next to him was a card with the number 9 written on it. I heard someone calling the police in a trembling voice, and others sobbing and swearing. The police soon arrived and investigated the scene, but the police officer who was examining the body suddenly shouted in a loud voice, "What the heck? This corpse has no brain!" The scene became noisy, and police questioned people if there were any witnesses, but there were none. I remembered the man I saw in the alley and told the police. When they got to the alley, the man was already gone, and I haven't heard any news of him since. Then one night, I was walking down that alley alone. There was no one around, only the rats squeaking past, when suddenly I saw someone in front of me. It was a man. He looked at me and abruptly started rummaging through his bag. I felt something ominous and was about to turn around and leave the alley when suddenly I heard the sound of someone running behind me. I turned around. The man was running towards me with an axe held high in both hands. I started screaming and running away. He shouted and chased me. I want to eat. I ran out of the alley and screamed for help. People passing by looked at me in surprise, and when I looked back, the man was gone. From then on, I never went down the alley ever again. Several months passed without incident, and the fear was gradually forgotten. Then one day, as I was passing by the alley, a man spoke to me from inside. I heard there's a rumor that someone is eating brains in this alley these days. Would you like me to tell you the truth about it? He had gloves on both hands and was holding a red bag. At that moment, I realized who the man was. Tell me what's in that right now, I shouted, and then he laughed and said, "Ha ha ha! This is a fresh one picked right over there. It's hard to get one these days because there are so many CCTVs and police officers, but luckily I found a drunk person sleeping, and I grabbed it right away. Once the alcohol smell goes away, it will be really delicious." Then he took something out of his bag. It was the hatchet. "But you look tastier. Just stand still for 5 seconds. It takes a lot of concentration to hit the head in the right spot." Then he aimed the hatchet at my head as if he were throwing a dart. I was scared and ran away, and the axe flew past me close enough to move my hair and hit the wall, clanking loudly. I kept running without stopping. I looked back and saw he was eating something from the bag and waving his hand at me. I reported it to the police. The police arrived, but he was already gone. There was a card with the number 8 written on it in the alley. The next day, another brainless body was found near the alley, and the police began a large-scale investigation. A few months later, I heard that he had been caught. He told the police that so far he had eaten the brains of 9 people, but only 2 bodies were found by the police. So when the police asked where the remaining 7 bodies were, he reportedly said, "Well, how do I know where the garbage goes? What are you going to do with the shells when you find them?" The police kept asking him where he had dumped the bodies, but he kept saying he didn't know. Then, when the police asked what the numbers on the cards left in the alley meant, he reportedly said, "Score. I've always been looking for a 10 out of 10 taste, but I haven't found it yet. Shit. Let me go. I can never go to jail until I eat a 10. He was sentenced to life in prison, and I still can't go down that alley. When I was little, maybe 8 years old, we had a neighbor who was really odd and didn't really communicate with other people that much. He would only speak a few words to one person, my dad. I still remember how he looked at the people who passed by his house with those bright blue eyes. He seemed normal for the most part. As I said, he had bright blue eyes, and he was tall with tan skin and brown hair. I think he was in his early 40s. It was summertime, and my dad used to wash people's carpets as a side job. Then one day, my neighbor asked my dad if he could wash his carpet, and my dad agreed. Then the neighbor said, "When you are done, Just drop it in front of my house. Can you finish it in 3 days? My dad replied, yeah, sure, no problem. My dad finished cleaning his carpet a day early, so he decided to just bring it over to him right away. After getting there, he knocked on the door a few times, but didn't get an answer. He was surprised, because he knew that the man didn't have a job at the moment, and that only his wife worked. But she was supposed to be home hours ago, which meant that both of them should have been there. Plus, the car was parked in the garage behind the house, so he knocked again. No answer. He didn't want to disturb anyone else, so he just left. The next morning, when he came home from the market with our groceries, he looked agitated and spoke to my mom. She eventually told me that the guy had actually killed his wife. While my dad was standing at the front door, knocking, he had slit her throat with some kind of weapon, which was probably a huge knife or something bigger. I don't know, because the guy actually had mental problems and didn't take his medicine as often as he was supposed to. He was okay when he was taking his medication, but unfortunately, his wife died that day. I really don't know what was happening in his head during these unfortunate moments. Today, I still wonder what might have happened if my dad had entered the house. I'm just glad he didn't. This story happened to my friend a few years ago. My friend's parents went out one evening to eat at a restaurant. They offered to have my friend come with them, but she had a test the day after, so she had to stay home to study. At 7 p.m., her parents left, and she was all alone. She was sitting in her room studying for a test, and after about an hour, it started to rain heavily. The noise made it difficult for her to study, so she decided to put on headphones and listen to music to help. Because she was wearing headphones, she could not hear anything, which is why she did not hear it when, a half an hour later, her front door opened. After a while, she got thirsty, so she took off her headphones and went to the kitchen to get some water. As she was going downstairs, she heard footsteps. She knew her parents weren't supposed to be back until later, so she thought it was weird that they would be home already. She had a window by the stairs overlooking the parking lot, but when she looked out, she didn't see her parents' car. When she noticed that, she ran quickly back to her room and locked the door. She called her parents and told them what happened, and they immediately left the restaurant and drove home. Her dad told her to stay in her room and quietly make her way into her closet. While her parents called the police from the car, she went into the closet and stayed hidden. While she was in there, she heard the person in her house coming up the stairs and trying to open every door. When he got to her door and noticed that the door was locked, he started banging on it and trying to break it in while screaming, "Let me in!" Luckily, as soon as he broke down the door and entered the room, the sound of sirens blared in the distance. He ran away, and my friend stayed in the closet until the police rescued her. Afterward, the police searched the whole area, but did not find anyone. To this day, my friend refuses to be left home alone and has never listened to music in her headphones again. Only God knows what would have happened if she had not taken off her headphones.
Hi, my name's Sarah and I'm 17, but this happened when I was 14. I live in Australia, and although I was born here, I come from a Middle Eastern background. One night I was home alone in my bedroom on my phone with the light switched on. The house was quiet, but I paid no mind, as sometimes my family is quiet when they're all doing their separate things. It was nearing 9 p.m. when I heard a noise in my living room. I brushed it off by telling myself, it's just my siblings playing, and continued scrolling on my phone. But this noise continued for a few more minutes. Then I heard a loud stomping in the hallway near my door, as if someone in the house was searching for something. An uneasy feeling crept into my stomach when the noise suddenly stopped. I looked up from my phone to see a shadow outside my bedroom door. Keep in mind, my bedroom door at this time didn't have a lock, as my parents believed I had no use for it. The hallway light was switched on, and I could see the shadow of someone's shoes directly outside my door, just standing there. My unease grew, as normally I would just open the door to see what my family wanted, but something in my gut prevented that from happening. I decided to call my dad and see if he was home. When he answered, I heard talking in the background. My house was silent. This made me realize he wasn't home. "Bob, are you home?" "No, I'm not. I'm at your auntie's house. Why? What's wrong?" Not wanting to scare him with something that was mindless, I continued staring at the shoes as I responded, "Nothing's wrong. I was just asking." The call ended shortly after, and I decided to call my mom. When she answered, she immediately asked what was wrong instead of calling out from the living room like she normally would if I called her. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Are you home?" I replied, taking my eyes off the shoes. "No, your siblings wanted to go to your cousin's house, so I took them. Why?" Now, being completely terrified but still uncertain, I just told her to come home quickly because I didn't want to be alone. When the call ended, I looked towards my room and the shadow of the shoes was gone. There was silence for a minute or so until my stomach turned, now angrier and harsher than before. I was shaking now and didn't know what to do, as I was in my room with no lock and nothing to defend myself with. Needing reassurance, I called my friend, who understood my fear and told me to sit against the door. I listened to her, and she stayed on the call with me until the house was silent and my mother got home. When I opened the door to her, I told her everything that had happened. She began searching the house for someone or any missing items. There was nothing. The only thing out of place was the laundry room window that was wide open, which wasn't the way it was left. My parents made sure to lock all the windows, and after a day or so, nothing else happened, so the incident was forgotten. It's been years now since it happened, but I will still never forget the fact that someone or something was in my house, right outside my room, just waiting.
This story took place in California. My parents had left me home alone for the week. I loved being home alone because I could invite my friends or my girlfriend over, but this one night I decided to invite my friends Timmy and Jack. Jack and I were pretty close because we'd been friends for 3 years, while Timmy and I had met at the gym about 5 months ago. But Timmy and I were still like brothers. Anyway, they get there, and we're having a good time, but we start getting hungry. I wanted some pizza, but Jack wanted sushi, so we played rock, paper, scissors. I won, so we went to go get some pizza from a local pizza shop. I had my own car, a little GMC truck that my dad had bought me on my 17th birthday that we took to the pizza shop. We ordered 3 pizzas and 1 2-liter of Coke. As we were leaving, I realized I had forgotten to lock the door to my house, so I got a little worried that someone might break in. When we got there, the front door was wide open. We left the pizzas in the car and decided to go in. Timmy told me he had some spray paint, so if there was anyone trying to hurt us, he could spray them in the eyes. I told him that was a good idea. Jack went in first, then Timmy. I was last because, well, I was scared. We searched everywhere, but we didn't find anyone. However, we didn't check in my parents' bathroom. We all went to check together. Jack went in first because he just wanted this to be over with and eat pizza, but when he stepped foot into that bathroom, some guy jumped out from behind the shower curtain, started choking Jack. So Timmy sprayed him with the spray paint and the guy started screaming in pain. Then I kicked him right in the side of the head, which ended up knocking him out. We called the police quickly after, and as it turns out, he was a wanted thief from Arizona. Jack and I are still friends, but Timmy moved to a different city. Every time we get together, we still laugh about that day. I'm a 25-year-old guy from Australia, and this happened to me when I was around 13 years old. I've lived in the same house for my entire life. My parents bought the house and moved in before my older sister and I were born. When they moved in, there was a huge tapestry of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper hanging on the wall in the hallway. My parents found it a bit strange, as the previous owners took all the other furniture and pictures with them when they moved out. As the tapestry covered a large, empty space of the wall, they decided to just leave it hanging there. For context, my bedroom door was directly across from the tapestry in the hallway, such that when my bedroom door was open and I was lying on my bed, I could see it hanging on the wall directly through my open bedroom door. As a little kid, I always used to sleep with my bedroom door open, and for some reason, the tapestry always gave me the creeps. I hated looking at it through my open door, especially at night. Over the years, I eventually just got used to it. When I was 13, my parents decided to buy me a double bed. I was so excited, and as soon as I got to use my new bed, I always slept in the same position on the left side of the bed, facing my left bedroom wall. A year or so later, my dad decided to repaint the hallway a different color, and during that time, he had to take the tapestry down. My parents then decided that the hallway looked better without the tapestry, so they didn't hang it back up. After a few nights of the tapestry being down, I had a horrible nightmare. In the nightmare, I was lying in my bed just like I was before I fell asleep. I then looked up, and there was a black, demon-looking creature climbing up my right side bedroom wall, and I was absolutely terrified. It had black, scaly-looking skin, a long, pointed tail, and completely black eyes with red slit-like pupils, the kind that goats have. It opened its mouth and made an awful screaming sound and revealed its sharp, pointed teeth. I then woke up. My heart was racing, and I was covered in sweat. I was on the right side of my double bed, facing the wall that the demon was climbing up in my nightmare. I was instantly freaked out because I always slept on the left side of my double bed, facing the opposite wall. I eventually calmed down enough to go back to sleep. Almost every night for around the next month, I kept having the same nightmare over and over again, and also kept waking up facing that same wall on the opposite side of my bed that I didn't sleep on. Each night, I found it harder and harder to wake myself up and pull myself out of that nightmare. It got to the point where I was scared to fall asleep, as I worried that eventually, one night, I wouldn't be able to wake myself up, and I didn't want to find out what would happen to me in the nightmare if I couldn't. I went for several nights with only 1 or 2 hours of sleep, and then without sleeping altogether. Eventually, time passed, and the nightmare stopped. Looking back at it now, it makes me wonder, why did the previous owners of our house put up the tapestry in the first place, and then decide to leave it there when they moved out? It makes me think that they might have hung it up for a reason, maybe as some kind of protection from the demon-like creature. I'm not a religious person, but maybe they believed that the depiction of Jesus in the tapestry would protect them and keep the demon away. All I know is that soon after we took it down, the nightmares started. Over a decade later, I still get chills when I think about those nightmares. I can still picture the demon-like creature so clearly in my mind. I hope I never have to see it ever again.
I was staying with my grandparents for the summer. They lived in a small town on the countryside where everyone knew everyone else. The first time I went to their house, I met this strange lady. Her name was Susie, and she was their neighbor. She was in her mid-50s, lived alone, and was always nice to everyone. She often came over to the house to talk to my grandma. One day, I was about 12 at the time, I was playing with my friend. We heard whispering coming from behind us. We looked around and saw her. She was talking to someone she called Tommy. Nothing seemed to be wrong, but remember, everyone knew everyone. And even my friend, who had lived there all his life, didn't know the boy. When we approached her, we asked, "Who are you talking to, Miss Susie?" She looked at us, smiled, and said, "My little friend, Tommy." We looked to see where she was facing, but didn't see anybody there. She was still talking, and we ran away to my house. We told my grandma, and she said her son Tommy had died years ago. A chill went down my spine. The next day, I saw her and asked about Tommy, and she said he was home. I asked if Tommy could come over to play tonight, and she said that he was okay. This is where my story gets even more creepy. My grandparents drove over to my parents' house in the city to pick up some more clothes for me, so I was home alone. They said I should ask my friend's parents if he could sleep over, so I did. Because we were old enough and they lived close by, they said yes. So that same night, we played video games and watched TV till 11 o'clock. We went to bed, and then about 12:30 a.m., we heard it. 2 knocks on the door. It couldn't have been my grandparents, because they said they weren't coming back until the next morning. The knocking continued until we stupidly opened it. We were shocked. There was a boy standing outside. We couldn't see his face, but he looked about 10. We asked who he was, and he said, in a spine-chilling voice, "Tommy?" He lifted his head, and then we finally saw his face. It was pale and had black holes instead of eyes. He said, "I came to play," in a loud, demonic voice. We shut the door and ran to my room, scared out of our minds. The next morning, we woke up drenched in sweat. My grandparents opened the door and woke us up. We haven't told anyone till today. I'm 15 now, and it still feels like it happened yesterday.
I just want to share a story from when I was a kid. I was 5 years old at the time. It was around midnight, and I was watching some late-night shows while my mother was already sleeping. My mom let me watch movies on TV, even if it was late, since she would work late as well, so she didn't have time to be mad at me. She was a bar entertainer, even though she graduated with a bachelor's degree. She chose to work at the bar since it was much more convenient for her schedule. We only had each other, and we didn't have enough money to pay for someone to watch me. Going back to the story, as I watched the last show, around 12 a.m., as the music of the Philippine anthem was shown, I decided to turn off the TV and sleep beside my mother. As I turned around, I saw through our window a shadow lurking right above my mother's head. I adjusted my eyes, and when I could see it clearly, it was wearing a cloak, a black cloak. However, the scary part is that it had no face at all. I'm sure if it had a face, I would have definitely seen it, since the moon was so bright that night. There was just like an empty space on its head, and it was like the cloak was floating in midair. I stared at it for more than 10 seconds because I was so scared to move at all. I didn't even have time to freak out. After a minute or two, it began to move away from the window, but instead of turning around, it slowly melted down. I'm not quite sure where it went. It was like it was being pulled down by hell. I began hugging my mother tightly and fell asleep. As I woke up, I still remember what happened and crossed my heart. I also remembered what the black cloak said. 358. I thought it was just a random number that I misheard, but once I got older and recalled everything more clearly, I realized it was the date my mother died. My mother died on March 5th, 2008. I don't know if it was death himself trying to warn me, but to this day, what ifs are still running through my mind. What if I had tried to look closer at it? What would have happened to me? Hi, my name is Mimi, and I've always been able to sense and see the paranormal. It first started when I was 7, and ever since then, I've never stopped encountering them. This is one of my bizarre experiences. I was 13 at that time, and I often had to stay home alone since both my parents were out working until late in the afternoon, and my older sister usually came home pretty late from high school. One day I was watching TV and just chilling in the living room. It was around 3:30 p.m. and suddenly the doorbell rang. It was my mom. I was glad because I was getting pretty bored by myself. My mom freshened up and we had lunch together while talking about a lot of things. I felt relieved that I wasn't alone anymore. Even though I was pretty used to being home alone, I still felt kinda lonely at times. After finishing our meals, my mom and I went to our separate rooms and did our own things. Surprisingly, even though my mom was at home, I didn't hear anything from that room. Usually when my mom was at home, you could always feel her presence and she would be very active. In fact, she barely stays in her and my dad's room. Even though it was a little strange, I soon brushed it off as I thought she might be tired and just took a nap or something. An hour passed quickly and I was too busy chilling in my room, so I didn't think much about the strange silence in the house. It was around 5 p.m. when the doorbell rang again, and I assumed my sister came back from school. However, as I looked through the door, chills went down my spine. It was my mom who was standing outside. But how was this possible? Mom was just in her room and she never went out, even if she did. I would have heard something. She never goes out without informing us, and this part is as scary as it gets. She was wearing the same clothes when she went to work and was even carrying the same bag. I froze in fear. If this was Mom, then who was the one who I talked to and had lunch with? My heart was beating loudly against my chest, and I mustered up all my courage and opened the door. My mom came in and behaved how she normally would, then went to her room to freshen up. Surely I couldn't have imagined this whole thing, right? I then ran to the kitchen, and to my horror, there were 2 plates in the kitchen sink, both recently eaten off of. I felt like I was going crazy. What the hell was happening to me? Even though I was flabbergasted and didn't know what to do or how to react, I knew that I wasn't dreaming or imagining things, and I very much knew the difference between imagination and reality. I was really spooked out by the experience, but I calmed down after a while. After all, this was not completely unfamiliar, as I've had many strange and paranormal experiences before. But what makes me wonder to this day is who I really talked to and had lunch with, and what they wanted from me. I'm 18 now, and these bizarre and out-of-the-ordinary incidents are still going on with me. But by now, I've grown accustomed to them, even though they still scare me sometimes. A lot.
I was being chased by creatures in an unfamiliar town with no one around. I screamed for help, but when they heard my voice, even more monsters came barreling out at me. Each of the monsters had a terrible appearance, but one in particular, a monster with a huge bat-like head and a snake's tongue, rushed and bit my leg with its huge icicle-like teeth. I screamed in terrible pain and hit its head like crazy. Then it screamed and pushed me. I fell backward and hit my head. It was at that moment that I woke up. It was 4 a.m. It's already been 2 weeks since the nightmares about those monsters started. My hand where I hit the monster in my dream was tingling. I stood up and fiddled with my hands, but my legs suddenly hurt and I fell to the floor. When I looked at my legs, they had turned black. That was where I had been bitten in my dream.
Holy crap, did I really just get bitten?
My leg hurt so much that I ended up going to the hospital, and the doctor looked at my leg, tilted his head quizzically, and said,
"Your leg is rotting. Have you ever been stabbed by a rusty nail?"
I said in surprise.
"I've been bitten, but I don't know if they were rusty." "What? You got bitten?"
I immediately realized it was a dream and covered my mouth. It was so vivid.
Actually nothing happened."
Then the doctor looked at me strangely and said,
"We need to get you into surgery right away. Make sure you don't get bitten again."
Afterward, the doctor said the surgery went well and wished me good luck. As I left the hospital, I looked at the darkening sky.
I hope those ugly guys don't show up again tonight.
I took a hammer out of the storage room and slept with it next to my bed. Then I was dreaming again. I was standing in a deserted village, and there was a hammer next to me. After a while, the monsters came running, and I picked up the hammer and hit them hard. It felt like I had been fighting with them for 10 hours straight. And when I woke up from my dream, my blanket was all soaked with sweat. And the hand that had been holding the hammer was bruised and scuffed. This dream continued to haunt me day after day, and I became exhausted. I felt like I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. Then a few days later, I went to the doctor to check on the surgery site and heard some shocking news. He said that the number of patients visiting hospitals with rotting skin had spiked. He said it was really strange and kept shaking his head. I met some of the other patients, and at first, they just stared out the window blankly without saying anything. When I brought up the dream, everyone was shocked and said that they had been bitten by monsters in their dreams too. I was stunned, and one of them said that if you killed the monsters, their numbers would decrease. After hearing that, I decided to kill all the monsters. Every night, my battle continued. I smashed the heads of dozens of monsters and kept count. Every night, I danced to the sounds of the monsters' footsteps, sang to their groans, and cheered to their cries. I was becoming a monster. Eventually, the numbers of monsters began to decrease little by little, and the monsters, which used to fill the village, were down to about 3 or 4. We patients gathered together regularly and shared our dreams every day. A few weeks later, I went to a meeting and heard some appalling news. One of the members, Jeremy, had died the previous night. He died suddenly in his sleep. But the strange part was that his head had been burned black, and there were no signs of anyone else in the house. Everyone was taken aback. That night, I saw a huge monster in my dream. He was enormous, perhaps 10 feet tall, had only one arm, and hot smoke poured from his hand. He reached out his massive hand and tried to grab my head, and the intense heat made it impossible for me to breathe. I dodged out of the way and hit his arm with my hammer, but his arm was as strong as a telephone pole. He kept trying to grab my head, but I kept dodging and striking out at his arm with the hammer until his arm broke with a loud bang. Smoke filled my face. At that moment, I woke up coughing. Fortunately, I'd broken the monster's arm, but he wasn't dead yet. I knew he would come for me again. A few days later, the same monster was running towards me with its mouth gaping and spouting hot smoke, and I hit the monster's head with my hammer as hard as I could. Its head finally cracked, and hot liquid spewed out from inside. As the liquid splashed onto my forearm, I felt a searing pain. Then it fell to the ground, and its eyeballs rolled out of its head. The eyeballs were like black beads, and I picked one up. At that moment, I woke up from my dream and felt something in my hand. In surprise, I looked at my hand and saw that it was holding a black bead. I stared at it blankly, and then, suddenly, smoke just started jetting out. I dropped it because it was hot, and it bubbled and burned and disappeared. From that day on, I never had those nightmares again. What exactly were those dreams? Was it all just a delusion, or did it really happen?
This is a creepy incident that happened about 3 years ago when I moved to a new neighborhood. The housing there was really cheap, and it was a very quiet neighborhood, so I really liked it. I was resting at home just a few days after moving in, when a rotten smell suddenly hit me. I followed the smell to where it had come from, and it was the entrance. So I opened the front door, and there was a girl standing there. She was wearing torn clothes covered in dirt. Her hair had fallen out, with only a few strands remaining. Her skin was rotten in many places, and she was covered in bugs that were eating away at her. I screamed, "Ah! It's a zombie!" She grabbed the door with her rotten hands and opened her mouth wide as she pushed her face through the crack of the door. Her jaw split open until her mouth touched her chest. I screamed at the top of my lungs. And then suddenly, she disappeared.
Ah, Rose came to say hello to you.
It was the voice of Tom next door. He was walking up to my house.
When you meet her, you must give her some candy. Otherwise, she'll have a hard time. She's the reason we have so many candy stores in our neighborhood.
As he said that, he gave me a piece of candy and walked back to his house. I was in a daze. I couldn't understand anything he was saying at all. Her face kept popping into my head for the rest of the day. The rotten skin, the smell, and even the creaking sounds of her bones when her mouth opened. I tried to forget about it, but I kept thinking about it until I fell asleep. What on earth was she? Is someone filming a horror movie nearby? After thinking about all sorts of possibilities, I opened my eyes to find it was morning. I was driving to work when the car suddenly thumped, as if it had hit something. I was so surprised that I stopped the car and jumped out. That girl was in front of my car. The front bumper of my car was all dented, and she looked at me with her body all contorted. I got goosebumps all over my body. She stood up and adjusted every twisted bone. Then she came towards me and stretched out her hand. Her hands were full of candy remnants. When she opened her mouth, ants crawled all over her rotten teeth. I screamed like crazy, and Tom came running out from next door.
Here!
He threw some candy at the girl and went back into his house. She took Tom's candy, ate it, ran to his house, and stood in front of the door for a while. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then I realized something. Her hair and clothes didn't move at all, and she moved as if gravity didn't exist. My vision suddenly turned dark. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a bed at Tom's house. I was startled and jumped up, but my head hurt so much that I fell down again. Tom, what's going on? Tom sighed.
If you stay in the same place as Rose for a long time, the cells in your body start to die. You may have noticed, but she's not a living being. Everything around her loses its vitality. Trees, flowers, animals, even oxygen. 20% of the deaths that occur in our neighborhood are unsolved. Why? Because the culprit is not from this world.
I got goosebumps again, but I also thought that Tom was making fun of me. I couldn't believe it because I've never seen anything like a ghost in my life. But from then on, I always carried candy in my pocket. And every time I ran into her, I threw her a piece of candy and ran away. One time, I accidentally threw the candy too high, and another hand came out of her mouth and snatched it away. It was only then that I realized what Tom said was true. I went to Tom's house and asked him about the people who had died because of her. At first, he waved his hands, saying he didn't want to even think about it. But when I persisted, he eventually started talking.
The first was Chase, a strapping 18-year-old man who mistook Rose for a person. Up until then, her face had not rotted and she was quite pretty. So he kissed her, and a few hours later, he vomited up blood and died. When the autopsy was performed, hundreds of bugs were found in his body. They had eaten all of his organs. Of course, the police could not find the cause.
It doesn't make any sense.
I know.
What about the next person? He was silent for a moment and poured himself a cup of coffee. I could see his hands shaking.
It was a middle-aged woman named Nicole. But one day, she was found dead with a snake stuck in her throat. The police were unable to find any evidence, and the case remained unsolved. We thought it was Rose who did it, because Nicole always said, "Go away, Satan," whenever Rose appeared. I guess Rose didn't want to hear that.
My body was shaking from the shock. You'd better stop. I don't want to puke in your house.
Yeah, but if you just carry candy, our neighborhood is a really nice place to live.
He smiled awkwardly and handed me some candy. I always carried candy with me after that, and lived uneventfully for several months. Then one day, I ran into Rose as I was coming out of the house, and the moment I put my hand into my pocket, I realized I'd forgotten to grab candy, but I was too lazy to go get some. So I just tried to quickly run past her. That was a terrible mistake. Suddenly, her tongue stretched out and wrapped around my body. I barely managed to shake it off and run away. That night, the skin all over my body turned red, and I suffered from tremendous pain. I was so sick that I went to the hospital. The doctor said that there was a toxic substance all over my skin and asked what happened. I was so angry, so I decided to get revenge on Rose. I started carrying an iron ball with me, and when I ran into her again sometime later, I threw the ball at her and shouted, "It's a new kind of candy!" She took the iron ball, put it in her mouth, and swallowed it. Moments later, she fell to the floor in incredible pain, clutching her neck, and crawled away writhing. She hadn't been seen in town since then, and it's rumored that she simply disappeared. People started walking around the quiet streets furtively. People held a candy smashing festival, saying that they can finally go around without candy. I was proud that I had defeated her. Then one day, I was walking around the neighborhood. I saw a huge man eating cotton candy. However, upon closer inspection, it was not a man, but Rose. She looked completely different from before. The skin all over her body seemed to be covered with gray stones. Her neck had become thick like a toad. I screamed at her grotesque appearance, and she opened her mouth very wide and ran towards me. I smelled a strong mixture of sweet and rotten, and I ran for my life. She retched and expelled a hot, sticky liquid all over me. The liquid covered me completely, and as the liquid gradually hardened, my body also began to harden along with it. I thought, this is how I die. Then I heard someone shout,
Here's a big piece of candy!
And she stopped and turned her head. Tom and a priest were standing there. The priest threw a large water balloon at her, which she caught and swallowed. Then suddenly, she became extremely distressed. Her body began to melt, and she dissolved into the ground and disappeared. What the priest had thrown was a water balloon filled with holy water. Tom broke me free from this weird shell she had encased me in. I packed my bags and moved away the next day. I don't know what happened to her after that. Tom said she was completely gone, but I think she will come back again someday.
This happened 8 years ago, when I was working as a taxi driver. I haven't been able to get behind the wheel of a car since this incident. On that night, which I still remember vividly, the moonlight was unusually blue and cold. Around 2 a.m., I was tired and wanted to go home. At that time, the backseat car door suddenly opened, and a man wearing a red fedora and red suit got into my car. There was no one around, so I was startled that this man just suddenly appeared. I clutched my chest. He was wearing red sunglasses. His face, just slightly visible in the darkness, was gaunt, and his cheekbones were severely exposed. I asked him where he was going. Then he gave a strange answer.
To a place you will hate so much.
His voice sounded like it was leaking air. I thought he was a strange person, but I tried to speak calmly. Sir, please tell me your destination, and I'll take you there quickly. I need to go home soon and see my wife for even just one more minute.
Oh, that's romantic. I think it was a good decision to choose you.
He was giggling obnoxiously, and I thought he was crazy. I was thinking about throwing him out, but then he said,
There's a cemetery about 10 miles from here. Let's just go there.
I was a little annoyed, but all I could think about was quickly dropping him off and going home, so I started the car. I was nervous and wanted to lighten the mood, so I spoke to him. What do you do?
I'm a delivery man.
His voice still sounded like there was air escaping. Oh yeah? What are you delivering?
I'm delivering something very interesting. I'm delivering it right now.
Yeah? You're delivering now? But you're not holding anything. Then he started laughing out loud, and at that moment, dust flew out of his mouth. I was shocked. All of his teeth, visible from his open mouth, were rotten. His gums were missing. His tongue was rotten, disgusting, dry, like a mummy. For a moment, I was confused as to whether I had seen an illusion. Then I saw a cemetery ahead, and he said something I couldn't understand.
Oh, it's about time. Goodbye.
He hummed an unknown song and rolled up his sleeves, revealing his rotten, dry, bony arms. Then suddenly, he came closer to me, put his hand in my mouth. I was startled and tried to stop him. The car lurched forward and backward, and before I knew it, his hand was down my throat. Then I felt his hand grabbing my heart. I was in tremendous pain. I screamed, turning the steering wheel, and slammed the brakes. At that time, the man whispered something in my ear. At the same time, I heard the sound of the car wheels screeching, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed, and my wife was next to me, crying. She said when she saw me waking up, "Are you okay? The doctor said you almost died from a heart attack, but you survived." I was floored. I suddenly remembered the man and asked her, "What happened to the man in my back seat?" Then she looked at me with a questioning look and said, "What man? You were riding alone. Could it be that your brain is also injured? Doctor!" She began sobbing. "The man in red!" No matter how much I shouted, she just cried. I was so stunned, and the rescue workers who came to the scene also said that there was no one in my car but me. I thought the conversation with the backseat passenger might be on the dash cam, so I asked my wife to get the dash cam. And when we played the video, we couldn't believe it. The man's voice couldn't be heard, only the sound of air leaking. My wife was confused and asked what the sound of air leaking was. Even when I showed it to the other people, none of them could understand what the sound was. Only I could recognize his voice. I panicked. What on earth was that man? I clearly remembered his red fedora shining in the moonlight, his creepy voice. They were so vivid. But I couldn't quite remember what he last whispered in my ear. Obviously, I fainted when I heard that. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember. Then, in the wee hours of the morning, I suddenly started getting goosebumps all over my body, like crazy. My body started shaking so much that the bed shook too. The reason was because I remembered the words he whispered. What he said. "I deliver people to the afterlife."
Hello, my name is Joy. This happened in 2015 when I was in my 20s. I lived with my aunt and had been a working student for 10 years. There were 6 of us living in the house. My aunt, my uncle, their 2 daughters, my grandma, and me. It was around 10:30 a.m. one day, and I was exhausted from not being able to sleep early the night before. So I slept for a while. I had a dream about 2 children, a boy and a girl, running around the house. As I remember, they're a bit chubby and wearing a white sleeveless and short pants. The boy's haircut was skinhead type, and the girl's hairstyle was short hair that leveled on her cheek. They were around 5 years of age. They looked so happy playing around the house. Then they appeared in front of me, and I saw a blurry image of myself in them. They stood there for a while. I noticed that I had been on sleep paralysis. The boy grabbed my arm like he was pulling down. At the same time, the girl was just staring. The boy just keeps pulling on me. I keep fighting even though I couldn't move my entire body, and I prayed. And I awoke in an instant. I never experienced or dreamed about them again after that. 2 years had passed, and my grandma and I were folding our clothes in the same house. While we were talking, she was talking about her experience with sleep paralysis. As I was listening attentively, she mentioned she experienced sleep paralysis maybe 40 years ago in our old house. She told me she saw 2 children during her sleep paralysis. She said the children were playing at first, and then the boy appeared above her and the girl simply stared. I was shocked and asked her about what they looked like. As she was describing the children, I froze for a while and felt goosebumps on my whole body. Her experience 40 years ago was the same as mine 8 years ago. And we still have no idea who those children were. I'm still not sure why my grandmother and I had the same sleep paralysis in different houses in years. Are we being followed by ghosts? I was awoken by the sound of static coming from my TV. Confused, I got up from the couch I was sleeping on and gave it a little kick, but it still wouldn't turn on. I didn't find this strange because we'd been having snowstorms for the past week, and figured it'd be up and running the minute the weather cleared. I was just about to go back to sleep, but then I remembered I had bought something for my dog the day before. Dog Buttons was the name of the package, and it was basically a box with multiple buttons inside. The buttons had recordings on them and were supposed to allow the dog to communicate with its owner. I set out the buttons on the ground and brought my dog to them, but he didn't seem to be interested. A few days passed and I was lying on my couch again and watching TV, like I always did when I had free time. I suddenly heard the word stranger from one of the buttons behind me. I looked over the couch to see that my dog still had his paw on the button, as if he wanted me to know it wasn't an accident. Stranger? Where? I asked, confused. Here, I heard come from another one of the buttons. My heart started to race and my hands and forehead felt sweaty. What the heck? I thought to myself. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't, so I went upstairs to my room and went to sleep. An hour or so passed and I woke to the sound of the glass from my front door breaking. I immediately got up and looked out the window, thinking someone had broken in. But no. Someone was breaking out. There stood a creature, tall and pale. It only had eyes, no mouth, no nose, just eyes. It had 2 pairs of arms, 2 at its shoulders and 2 on its back. It then slowly began to stand on its legs, and its head started to twitch maniacally. It barked, then let out the most blood-curdling screech imaginable. It then ran into the woods, where it was never to be seen again. My name is Lou Jane, and I'm 14 years old. I was born in Austria and have 3 siblings. They consist of 2 brothers and 1 sister. This incident occurred 2 days ago to my 19-year-old brother, Malik. My brother works as a receptionist in a hotel and is mostly required to work the night shift. Due to the illness of a colleague, his supervisor asked him to work the night shift 2 days ago. Frustrated, my brother left at midnight and drove to his workplace. Since it was night and he worked at a small hotel, only a few customers came out in the middle of the night. So he decided to watch Netflix on his phone. However, he wasn't the only person on duty. His friend was sitting in the upstairs reception, just as bored as him. At about 5 a.m., my brother had to use the restroom, so he left his desk. While he was in the restroom, his phone rang and he saw it was from his friend who worked on the floor above him. Confused, my brother picked up the call and answered. Hello? Okay, don't panic, but a sketchy guy just walked in. I'm watching the camera footage. He's got something in his pocket and he's going through your desk. My brother slowly pressed his ear against the door and heard someone going through his stuff. He slowly placed his hand on the door handle and swung it open in one swift motion. Sure enough, there stood an average man about my brother's height but a little more buff, wearing a fake Gucci hat, black shorts that reached his knees, and a waist bag. The man appeared to be in his late 20s with dark brown hair and a calm but sinister expression on his face. On seeing my brother, the man ran outside. My brother ran after him and tackled him to the ground. They fought for some time, throwing punches and kicks. At one point, the man tried to choke my brother. My brother's friend was still on the phone with him while all this was going on. He witnessed everything. And it was caught on camera. As the events progressed, he called the police. Meanwhile, 5 people were watching the fight from the balcony. My brother screamed for help, but no one came to his aid. They just stood there and did nothing. A random guy screamed, "Let him go!" to my brother. They thought it was a childish brawl. Finally, the cops arrived and handcuffed the man. Surprisingly, he began screaming in a language that no one understood. When they tried to talk to him, they discovered he didn't speak English or German. He appeared to be Romanian or something. When the police looked through his records, they found nothing. He didn't have a passport and had entered the country illegally. The cops then praised my brother for his bravery. My brother went to the hospital at 6 a.m. to have his wounds examined. He appeared to have broken his arm and had a few bruises and scratches on his face. His shoulder hurt a lot and he couldn't move around much. When my parents found out, they told my brother how dangerous the situation was and to be careful next time. When my brother's friend showed me a video of the CCTV footage on his phone, it was clear that the guy had no idea what he was looking for. It's like it came unplanned and it just backfired for him. I saw how my brother and the guy fought outside the hotel's front door. There wasn't a camera view from the outside, but there was on the inside. What scared me the most was how calm his expression was when he was screaming as the cops were holding him down. That madman is in prison now, and that's what he deserves. Ultimately, I'm proud of my brother for his bravery that night. My little brother sees my big brother as his biggest hero and is more proud of him than I am. That night will haunt my brother for a long time.